morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. This is Firoze Manji from Daraja Press. Welcome to our podcast today. Today we have an extraordinary couple of people talking about one of my favorite books called Mutiny of Morning. Show you the cover on it. It's a lovely book. We published a while back, but the author has been so busy of late that it has been impossible to find time to have her join us. The book, A Mutiny of Morning, Reclaiming the Black Body from the Heart of Darkness. A truly special and very, very special book. I'm a bit slow this morning because I've lost my my notes, but here we are. The author is Nikesha Breeze, who has taken pages from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and taken his own words and forced them to leave what she calls the colonized mind. She has made the words for her own in a poetic form. She illuminates the invisible Black voices inside a radical, surgical, and unapologetic Black appropriation, at the same time as a careful birthing of a spiritual roadmap. It is an extraordinary achievement. Originally from Portland, Oregon, Nikesha Breeze lives and works in the high desert of Taos, New Mexico, on the unceded land of the Taos Pueblo people. Nikesha is an African-American descendant of the Wende people of Sierra Leone and a Syrian-American immigrants from Iran. Nikesha has shown work both nationally and internationally, and they have featured in the Mokada Museum of Contemporary African Diaspora Arts in Brooklyn, the Albuquerque Museum, the University Art Museum, Portland Art Museum, and so on. It has been an extraordinary collection of exhibitions that she has carried out. We've invited, so I want to say welcome to you, Nikesha. It's very nice to have you on board. We've invited to lead the discussion on this a comrade and friend, Wende Marshall, who was an activist in the Southern African liberation support work and anti-apartheid organizing, a tenant organizer in Harlem, New York, a volunteer and board member of the First Needle Exchange Program in Philadelphia, a living wage activist and a leader organizer with Stadium Stompers, a North Philadelphia-based campaign of community resident students and workers who fought to stop Temple University's proposed football stadium. She has many other attributions, but I think for me the most special of which is of course that she was co-editor of a book that we published here at Daraja Press, Insurrectionary Uprisings, a reader in revolutionary nonviolence and decolonization. And she's in the process of writing what seems to be a really interesting book towards a liberation theology of catastrophe at the end of the world with Edgar Rivera Colon. So a very warm welcome to you, Wende. It's wonderful to have you both join us. So perhaps perhaps to start us off in the discussion, then maybe I can ask Nikesha. I mean, Joseph Conrad's book Heart of Darkness has been condemned as a racist book, and others who describe it as an ironic book. What made you go for this? What made you choose this particular book?
It's, it is a racist book, and it's very interesting. It's come up multiple times. It's been assigned in college in English classes. Still to this day, this book is assigned to read, often even without the critical commentary that's necessary for it. And it has shown up multiple times in my work, in my study, in my research. Particularly a lot of the ideas that are so seated in the book, the white supremacist ideas, and how they infiltrated into our society, specifically within African American history. And I I was walking down the street actually in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there was a free box outside the bookstore of books, and Heart of Darkness was on top. And it was in this free box, and I picked it up and I was like, wow, okay. There was something about the fact, one, that it was in a free box being thrown out there, and the fact that, and I opened it and it had scribbles all throughout. It was obviously somebody's book from college, and you can see their little notes, their doodles, obviously when they were bored, maybe reading it, but also pieces that were underlined. And I was just struck by the fact that it was still actively being engaged with. And so I took the book, and I had it in my bag, and then as I opened it, there was a sort of nausea that came over as I began to even read it again, and immediately I wanted to scratch out all the words. It really there was a strong feeling of there was something there that was pulling at me. And instead of scratching out the words, instead I began this process of dissecting it instead. And so it began, with this free box book, but it goes much deeper than that.
So you then constructed poetry by eliminating some of Conrad's work.
It felt more. Oh, are we breaking up a little bit?
Looks like Firoze is frozen.
Okay. Well, I'll continue. It felt more like, instead of erasing or taking away Conrad's words, instead it was allowing another voice to emerge, or to float to the surface. And I speak of that as the voices of the invisible world, the voices of the ancestors, and particularly, I believe the voices of the people of the Congo, that were so, drastically erased in that story, yet were the entire prop of the whole thing, and so their voices seemed to come up. And so it was more mystical than even and also more positive, actually, than the negation of Conrad's words. It was more about drawing forth something else that was between his words.
Okay, Wende, you've had a chance to read and review this book. Give us your thoughts and open the discussion up.
Well, as I said in my review, I think it's a brilliant poem prayer to put out in the world. I think it's very powerful. And I wanted to ask you right at the beginning how you see the relationship between us here on Earth and the invisible world, the voices that emerge, the ancestors. I think that helps give some context to people who may not necessarily understand all that yet.
Yeah. Thank you. That's such a beautiful question. And it's interesting, even as you're framing it, to say us here on Earth. And I believe the invisible world is also here on Earth with us. There is this mingling of our sort of corporal and incorporeal selves. There's the incorporeal spirits and beings that exist, I believe, from many angles, right? Ancestral spirits that have never had a corporal body, beings that are existing, in larger and, more integrated realms. There's animal spirits and spirits of nature. There's cultures throughout the world that understand and see and integrate relationships with that invisible world. And for me, it's very present. They're very present. The ancestors are present. They're here. They're communicating. And it's about sort of attuning ourselves to be able to hear them, to interact, and to be able to listen better. So as far as, and some people might not understand or get that, but there's so much more in the fabric of our life and existence and relationship with the world than a lot of us know, and than anybody can know wholly.
And a perfect example is the way that you provoke these voices emerge from the heinous white supremacist words of Joseph Conrad. Right? So,
playing Firoze, if it's okay, great, thanks.
what is it?
Say that again.
I just wasn't sure what the music means. If we needed to.
I think it might have just been an accident.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to notice that.
Oh, one is I was going to say, just real quick, is at the beginning you said something about it's not just still taught. Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness, not still taught. And I wanted to point out that if the anti-CRT critical race theory people win the day, which they very well may, Joseph Conrad's book will be celebrated as the way we understand the world.
Yeah.
So that's scary. But yeah, so I think that your understanding of the relationships between the visible and invisible worlds here on Earth is part of the way that you can reach in and animate the voices of our ancestors. I'm very, very struck by your method. Very curious about how this method needs to be applied all over the Western canon. I just wonder if you can say something about it. How do we understand the processes of opening up the words that have been foundations of racial capitalism and white supremacy and of our dispossession?
Yes. Process is really important to me when working with things and beings. I say that invisible world that is intangible. Process, the way of coming through, is very important. And it's really about also, like, I don't know, part of my entry into the process is also about getting myself out of the way, if that makes sense. Myself that has been socially conditioned in this environment, of white supremacist thinking, of romanticizing even my own histories, even my, Black histories. My social conditioning can fall into some sort of romanticization, I would say, of story. Like if I went in sort of as myself, looking for or trying to craft something that is the voice of the ancestors, I would fail, because I myself am fallible and have been conditioned. And so for me, when I create all of my work, from visual work to this literary work, I really try to create very strong scaffolds of process that help keep my own individual self out of the way, and to allow for something else to come through if I stick to the rules. And so I set very strong rules for myself in this process of coming into the book. So every time I would open the book, I knew what I needed to do. I knew I was going to be, sort of waiting and listening for words. So it felt like I'd open it and I would just stare at the page. And it was important for me not to actually read the book, to not fall into that narrative. And so I would open the book, I would look at the page, and right away allow, if there was even just at the very top, I'd start at the top of the page. I would wait till one single word would come out, and sometimes it wouldn't. And I would allow that in the process. I would allow that to happen, that nothing would come. But there is this place where I would wait and see what called. A single word would call, and I would then just put a square around it. And then, another might connect. That word might call to another word, in another line, which would call to another. And if it happened that way, I would follow it, and I would just put a square around each one, and without the idea of crafting. So that was part of it too, is that if I took myself out of trying to craft something and instead allowed it to craft itself, allowed the words. So sometimes they're disjointed and I wouldn't know where the poem was going, like why that word came after, and sometimes I would stop because another word wouldn't come. And the poem might not have been done, the page might not have been done, but nothing else would come. And I would find myself stuck, or I'd find my brain moving into the text. And I would leave the book. So there was one rule, was if a poem didn't emerge, if a word didn't emerge, let it go. Give it time. Allow it to come through quietly. Allow the patience of waiting for those voices to rise, because they're not always in the forefront. They're not always pushing. Sometimes they are more circumspect. So allowing space was an important rule. The other rule was, if I did wander, if I wandered into the briar patch of Joseph Conrad's mind and the story, I would consider it like I got trapped, or I got like dirtied by this foray. And I would really leave it, and I would intentionally be like, 3 days, you don't touch that book. Like it was the wrong side was pulling you. So I would not, and then I would come back to it. And so those rules were really important. Don't read the book. Allow the words to come. Allow the patience. And that when the page was done, when I was at the bottom of the page, the poem was done. So every poem ends on its page. And with those rules sort of in my pocket, I carried the book, and it became almost a diary journal. I'd pull it out and I would listen and see if I could have this conversation. If not, I'd put it back. Like, I just kept it, and we kept talking to each other, and we kept building. And, for a year's time, I had it as, my sketchbook with the ancestors, breaking it through. I didn't ever imagine I'd even publish it. I was really just having a conversation with these people, which, again, it's very deep, this relationship that emerged.
Can you say something about your emotions as you were in this process and as you were communicating this way through the words?
Yeah, as I was even just last night, I was reading through some of them again, and I was struck by, there's some of them are really angry, like they're harsh, they're angry, or there's some cutting feelings in them. And some of the poems are mystical and gentle and beautiful and lyrical. And I think, as far as my emotions, as I moved through it, I felt a lot of those things, like all of those things would come. There were times where, I felt my own, and it's just, again, in conversations, the words would come. There was one poem that talks about these, like the bared, gnarled teeth. I'm trying to find the one that, and there's this line that says, "Eat 'em," and it's this grotesque feeling. And I could, emotionally, I went through all of it. I could feel the pain. I could feel the tender joys. I could feel the grief in my own body as I moved through it as well. Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting that you see each page as a distinct poem, because I read it as one long poem prayer. So can you say something about that? Does it matter that I looked at it as one long poem?
No, and I love that. And you're inspiring me to actually go through and read it top to bottom as one long prayer. I haven't done that yet. And so I'm actually very excited to try and to see what emerges from that continuity, because I'm curious. Yeah, please. I'm like, now I want to know what you think.
It's very powerful. I didn't read it as separate. I read it as one, long poem prayer, and thought that it was incredibly powerful. I have more questions to ask about like the process and how we understand this process in this sort of secular Western world we live in. But before I forget, I wanted to bring up the part about a man appears like an emissary of rot, and the woman was the torchlight and emissary of guidance, higher intelligence, a singleness of purpose, a special being of virtue. So I wanted to bring up that opposition between the emissary of rot and the emissary of light in your
Mm.
work.
Mm. Yeah, and again, I haven't put them next to each other like that, and it's so beautiful to see that feeling, that line, a man appears like an emissary of rot. That poem is that's, I think, the very last line of that page. And when that line came out, I could actually like feel the rotten meat inside the line itself, and this like the stench of this white supremacist, genocidal, murderous being, that really took over the Congo in that time, in so many ways, in Africa in general, this whole story. But that the emissary of rot, and what it calls forward, an emissary also like feels like, the emissary is like the first of a huge onslaught to come, and that is the truth. That's our reality, is that this image, this rotten meat of white supremacy arrived, bringing harbinger bringer, right, of so much pain. And that standing next to this line around the woman as the emissary of light, this torchbearer. And the gender is irrelevant actually in the conversation, but there's this place of what is, again, I say that the joy, the hope, the places of beauty, so we have the juxtaposition of this image of rot, but then we have this tawny cheeked, dark black limbed emissary of light carrying a torch, out. And that's the stuff that, like, when I was writing it, that would strike me as so necessary. Again, these beings, these beautiful, beautiful beings, that were the prop and circumstance of this story, actually have their own incredible and important light to carry, and to pull through. And so, my work was to try and call forth that light, that torchbearer, that being that is surviving through the darkness, and carrying others forward. And so, yeah, those two lines are communicating sort of both sides of what's happening in this story.
Really good job on that, carrying forth the light out of that mess and into the world.
Yeah.
Wendy, I would be quite interested in hearing what your reactions were. What were your emotions as you read through this, even as an extended poem? What were you feeling?
So I read it through 3 times. And I think that the first time, it was spellbinding. I felt I felt the power of the words, the power of the method, and just sort of blown away by the book, by the poem, by the prayer, by the process. I think it's really, really important. And I think part of it is, I think that we live in this, secular Western racial capitalist mess, and people need to understand better how to communicate across those realms and in those relationships. And how do we glean wisdom, find light in a Western canon that has, disparaged, dispossessed, and basically fucked us for centuries. I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, it's certainly interesting. and Nikesha, I mean, you used the text from Conrad. Were you taking light out of that, to use the imagery that Wende just used? Were you shining a light on Conrad, or were you seeking creating something new, a light out of darkness?
Mm-hmm. It's something new. You know, in essence, and ultimately was attempting to completely eclipse Conrad. You know, there's, you know, he, in a way, it's interesting. Language is sacred. Our words are power. And that's very much illustrated by the power of Conrad's work itself and the way that it has infiltrated now for hundreds of years our thinking. And you know, it's not because of Conrad the person. It was Conrad's use of the tools of language, the use of words. You know, again, as a brilliant writer will say, but the truth is it's the words that have the power. And to take words, to take powerful words and language and to craft it as a tool that is ultimately, you know, destroying other people and is, you know, using language, which has, you know, been done in so many ways, but, you know, in so many books have been powerful, and so many ways of using language have, you know, caused great pain and oppression across the world. You know, he used these words to erase people, and so I'm taking them back. I'm taking his words back from where he got them. You know, he in a way stole those words and used them wrong, the power in the wrong hands in a way, you know, and I'm taking those words back and, you know, attempting to and doing, you know, crafting a poem prayer, like Wende said, you know, a new tool for liberation and for beauty and for celebration of these beings, you know, and giving a space for the words to help illustrate their pain and their grief that has also been erased. You know, the deep grief that is embodied in, you know, in history there that hasn't had a chance to speak, you know, is yeah, it's the work that I'm doing is trying to make a space using those words to make an avenue for the voices to be heard.
Can I ask for you to talk a little bit about what it means to decolonize and how Mutiny in the Morning is part of that and your process is part of that?
Yeah, you know, I'll start by, you know, just saying that the term decolonizing and decolonization has had a lot of arc in it. You know, there's a huge call from Indigenous people forever to decolonize and to build and develop decolonization practices. I mean, this is Indigenous calls, you know, specific across the world, but, you know, in this moment, I'm speaking specifically with, you know, North American Indigenous peoples, you know, who really brought that word into our general parlance. And I think that decolonizing, you know, it's held inside an Indigenous container, and at the same time, it's grown beyond that. And there's a lot of pain in that conversation as well. There's Indigenous, you know, friends and scholars of mine that are, you know, very much against others using the word decolonize and realizing that decolonizing as a word has become now sort of watered down and is being appropriated by, you know, various people. You know, it's, again, like a lot of revolutionary and powerful concepts often get taken, appropriated, and diluted by the master narrative in order to take their power. And so I want to just acknowledge that word decolonizing, you know, as an Indigenous rooted word, and then also using it in, you know, to talk about the work that I'm doing as well, you know, because colonization is something that has happened across the world, and is very much a huge part of the conversation in Africa that is still under colonial rule, if not in actuality and politically, in so many other ways I've witnessed. And so decolonizing for me in this context is a form of extraction. It's extracting this like parasitic mentality that has embedded itself into the story, the reality, and the people. That colonizing will come in and erase the culture, the beings, the land. I mean, it will come in and literally erase, take away, whitewash, and invisibilize truth. And so as I'm decolonizing, it's basically it's like a surgical extraction of the ideas of white supremacy that have been embedded, inside and consciously and unconsciously embedded into the structures of the text or the work. So as I'm decolonizing this work, it really is just about pulling out the white supremacist lens and giving another lens.
Do you have a favorite passage in your poem or poems?
Oof, that's a hard one, Wendy. You wrote, as you pulled out so many beautiful lines in your assessment of the work and that you sent to me. And there's poems in the book I would love to read fully, but I just love these lines that you wrote so much.
You wrote them.
Well, I guess you're right. I wrote them. So you reflected back to me. So this one here that always struck me. Trust this, the mud, the darkness, that black confidence in its ominous patience. That there's something there, and that might not be my favorite, but I love it just now as I'm reading it again. And I remember when it came, that the moment of the lines, and then as a whole, there's a feeling of time embedded in that line, this place of, again, deep faith and trust that we'll make it through. There's something here in this trust, the mud. It's thick, it's heavy, it's difficult. Trust the mud, the darkness, that black confidence. And again, the black confidence, even those two words together, there's something in it that feels solid. Confidence always has a sense of strength in itself. And to have the black confidence, right? There's a strength there, right? The black confidence in its ominous patience. Ooh. And ominous too. Like there's like all of the textures in the language shape something. They shape this deep, strong black presence and patience that is waiting through thickness. And that feels so much like the diasporic experience, across the globe.
Can I read you, I think my favorite line? It's from page 111.
Mm-hmm.
They want to kill us, full of mystery and wisdom, as though very existence was an insoluble problem.
Yeah. And it says it all, as though very existence were an insoluble problem. They want to kill us. And it's the truth. It's just the truth,
For the record, most definitely.
Yeah. And then the beauty, another line here, you put, a commingling of pain and sincerity compressed into the invisible. Like, again, this holding, since the sincerity and the pain and the humility compressed into, these small places inside. How are we holding that through? And yeah, there's a lot.
And then a black tranquil earth flowed under an overcast sky. To me suggests the sort of enduring resilience, and the ominous patience, the waiting.
Yeah, there's another poem in here I read last night, and it's I think it was called A Heap of Cotton, or there's a part where it says, but we were to die in a heap of cotton. I wish I could find it. I should have. Oh, there it is, 91. Yeah, page 91. It says, "We were to perish in silence with the fog, and yet the cries of violent sorrow, of unrestrained grief, had no signs of lifting, for we had been buried in a heap of cotton, far from essence." There's this place here where it's like we were to perish in silence with the fog. We were to die silently. And yet this pain, this unrestrained, what does it say? The cries of violent sorrow, of unrestrained grief had no signs of lifting. That we will not be quiet, even in our pain and even in our grief, and even as we were, are being destined to die, to be buried in a heap of cotton. We still cry out. And that's this other piece in the voice of this book. Like, these Black voices were meant to just die silently in Conrad's text. Conrad, was absolutely fine with the invisible erasure of all of these voices. They were to die in the fog quietly, and yet they didn't. And yet their voices come through, their cries of sorrow, their cries of grief, their, the truth of them. And then the last line of that, for we had been buried in a heap of cotton, far from essence, and yeah, there's just a pain there. There's a pain there.
How do you feel like your work, this work, A Mutiny of Mourning, speaks to or challenges some of the political realities, sort of rising white nationalism, fascism, permanent pandemic, climate collapse? How do you sort of situate your work in the middle of all of that mess? If you do.
Yeah, it's also hard to, right? I mean, it's all there already, right? Because it's the same story. What Conrad was doing in 1800s is what, Ron DeSantis is doing now. We're, I mean, in different ways, but it's the same story. The story hasn't ended. The attempt at erasure of a people, of a story, of a history, of truth, is still happening. And, so, if my work situates anywhere in it, it's as a knife, working carefully to cut the lie, to slice the lie in any way I can. My small, dissection here in this book, then of course expands and amplifies into all of the work that I'm doing in the world, all of the artwork that I'm doing, the community work that I'm doing, the organizing work that I'm doing. Everything is about cutting the lie of our erasure. We are not gone. Our history is not disappeared. Our stories are here. Our lives are valuable. Our voices and our prayers and our love is essential and is paramount and is more powerful. And so if anything, there is, this book is a piece of that larger work, situating in opposition to this constant and historical erasure.
Nikesha, you're not just a poet. You are an artist in so many multiple ways. Would you like to say a little bit more about your other expressions, artistic and political expressions?
Sure, briefly, and I would encourage folks to definitely check out my website, nikeshabreeze.com, or social media to see some of the other stuff I'm doing out there in the world. But yeah, I'm a painter, sculptor, installation artist, filmmaker, performance artist, and activist, community organizer. And so I work everywhere across internationally, nationally, and then of course within my own community very strongly. My paintings and sculptures, all of my work is dealing primarily with historical reclamation and reparation. I created a series of work called Foresights of Return, which really encompasses quite a large bit of my body of work. It's focused on ritual, reparation, remembrance, and reclamation. And so, the various works that I do are kind of touching on those main spaces. And even this book itself is a part of that, the ritual of the creation of the work through process, through rules, through specificity, and honoring and giving of gift into the writing. So ritual is essential. Remembrance, which is rooted in knowledge and history keeping and history sharing and preserving. Reclamation, reclaiming language, reclaiming image, reclaiming story, reclaiming land, yes, and reparation, and understanding reparation being both in the political climate, this understanding of sort of a re-justifying or giving back to communities. Reparations is complex. It's very complex. I think it's very necessary, and the pathways to it are complex. But reparation on the smaller scale, and even on the most intimate scale, is really about repair. What does repair look like? How does repair begin? Who can repair? Where does the repair start? So part of my reparations work is it starts with creating a space of nurturing a compassionate and empathic response, where people who view and see and experience my work feel compelled to move something, to do something, to shift something. And that compelling, because they see something as wrong. They see the realities as wrong. They understand it. They feel it in their bodies. And that being then the seed to the desire to repair, the desire to change, desire to support. And so reparation begins with this empathic pulse towards repair. And so my work is working at that base level of supporting the reparation from the point of compassion.
So you chose this particular image, which is one of yours, to be on the cover. Can you say something about it?
This actually is not one of my images. This isn't, and it should be in here, I hope, where it says the source from that image. Yeah, so this image comes actually, it's from a book from 1905. It was Henry Wellington Wack, who traveled into the Belgian Congo in 1905, which is right. This book, Joseph Conrad's book, was written in 1899. So it's in the same period of time. Henry Wellington Wack went into Congo Free State, and there were, it was basically a whole book on what was happening politically in the Congo during that time, and the trade and the state of the people, et cetera. So this was a drawing, an etching that was made in 1905, depicting the women and children in this Congolese village. So this is a real depiction at that time from the field, like a field drawing of the people in that village. And so I chose it, one, because these are the people I'm talking about. This is one of the only, images, from that time of, there's photos, terrible, painful photos, which are also, there's one in the book, also of that time, that shows the limbs being cut off, which was a big practice of King Leopold, in his colonization of the Congo. Was a horrible disfigurement and abuse and removal of limbs of thousands and thousands and thousands of Congolese people in that time. And so, yeah, that's where this image comes from. It's really in honor of the actual people.
Mm-hmm. Wende.
So while you were talking, I'm not an artist, but I'm interested. There's a lot of overlap in, what you and I are interested in or trying to get at. Remembrance, reclamation. When you talk about the space of nurturing empathetic response, I think about Baby Stugg's Sermon in the Clearing and Toni Morrison's book Beloved. Yeah. And that powerful space. But I'm wondering about the relationship between like art and organizing. I wonder about because what it feels like to me is that it's really, really hard to move people to understand the relationships between the invisible world and the visible world. Difficult to get people to focus on reclaiming, recreating. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, the relationship between politics and art, or organizing and art, literature. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is difficult. It's really difficult to move people at all. And it becomes more and more difficult the more distance we become from each other in real ways. All of our systems are aligned to really, especially Western systems, are aligned to keep us separate, both in mind and heart and spirit and in flesh, and to keep us feeling isolated. And so, to bring people together, to work into organizing is one of the hardest jobs anyone does, especially when it's around necessary and important political change.
I mean, the thing is that in terms of necessary political change, we're at the end here. Climate catastrophe is real, and so is fascism. So we're running out of time, is what I perceive. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the truth. We are running out of time, and we may be already past time. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Is the beast so big that it's just going to continue to just destroy everything, and literally our planet, our people, our minds. Like, you don't want to get into this place of feeling hopeless, apathetic, which is the danger. And so where is that place where you still feel hope that there can be change when we see that it's so close to the end and nothing has changed? If anything has gotten worse in some ways, if not worse, just more nefarious. Like, it's wild to watch the growth and shift of this beast, that has overcome and taken over our planet and our people. And art is uniquely positioned in that to do something. And I'm curious too around the power of it and how it works. I know that art is one of the most powerful tools that we have, mostly because of its freedom, its potential for liberation. Art itself is working on is often working with that invisible world, and it has the capacity to be completely shameless, outside of norm. Art can be radical and cutting and angry in a way that just a person talking on a stage with a podium sometimes can't. They can't say sometimes what art can say with an image or with a sculpture or a gesture. There's another form of language that art is. All art forms are really speaking on a different level of our perception. And I think that the art has the capacity, has the potential to be a very powerful cutting tool to get through the thickness and the sort of gates of language, that we have. And so I think art and organizing, when art is used well, consciously, and is used to its highest potential, it's very powerful for organizing people. It can move people. Music has been, the heartbeat and pulse of organizing forever. From war battle cries and battle songs, to get people ready to, to go and defend their country, to the revolutionary images that have shaped our world.
It seems, though, that there's a big disjuncture between where most Black people, most people of color, most suffering people, say, in the United States are, and sort of the reach of art. So I read your book and I found it stunning and powerful. But I don't know how we make sure everybody can have that experience, right? Like the you know what I'm saying? Like it's precious, right now.
Yeah.
The way art interacts with struggle in a certain kind of way. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. I don't, it's hard to, to imagine that this, I don't, like you said, like you had a strong experience with this work. So did I, and those that see it, may also. And so is it just about getting it out there, or getting the art out there, getting it seen by more people? Maybe. But there's also people who will read this work and not get it, not feel it, not understand it, and just disregard. And that's also the way it is with all art and all expression. We're in this place where people are saturated, inundated, numb, and brainwashed, to be honest. So folks like can't touch it, don't know how, and it doesn't break through, and maybe it's another kind of art or another type of word or another book, something that might make it through that thickness. But I can't imagine or assume that my work or any work can touch everybody. But those that it does touch and those that it does move, how that seeds into their life and their work, is the best I can hope, right? Is that my work can move and shift those that are ready for it, and that movement in them can help support another way that they move that then might affect another person. And this beast grows organically, through, who's ready to actually change. Which might be preaching to the choir. Again, like those who really need to know this might never get it. And that's the problem we are in too, where we are also polarized, where many of us who are doing active work are working within our little sphere, and not many of us are able to actually communicate across the aisles, and make change there. And that's our problem too.
So what are you working on next? What's your next book?
Yes, I actually do have two books sort of in the pipeline, which for I was like, and they're going to take some time. I'm working on them slowly. So on the literary side, one is actually is almost done. It's a large book around my philosophy of ritual reparation, remembrance and reclamation. So it's like an art coffee table book. So it'll be filled with all of my paintings and sculpture and installation work, but also all of my writing and research on these subjects and all of the background. So it'll be both sort of intellectual and literary book, but then also filled with my art. And so that's a big work that I'm working on now. And then I'm also developing an anthology from Black artists, Black and Black identifying, some BIPOC and Indigenous artists also are included, talking about rest and the power of rest, as a form of radical resistance. And so that book is growing. I'm writing for it and also editing and collecting submissions for this book. I'm really curious and excited about the ways that we are able to integrate rest as a form of radical anti-capitalism and resistance to the master narrative. How do we reclaim our time, our bodies, our space, and our dreams again? And so those are two literary works that I'm growing into. And then I have some pretty exciting large visual artworks that I'm working on too. One is a whole series that is diving very deeply into the Library of Congress National Archives, where we have a collection of over 2,500 firsthand narratives of formerly enslaved peoples. They were interviewed in the 1930s as a part of the WPA Writers Project. There's over 10,000 pages of firsthand narratives and 500 photos in our history, and so in our archive. And so I'm working with those stories to bring them out in quite a number of beautiful ways, from performance to visual art to a genealogical research database. So those are all commingling in the background for me right now.
Just illustrating some of the stuff from your website. Some really beautiful material here. Really, you are very, very talented in so many different ways. Last words then, Wende.
Nikesha, I just want to thank you for this amazing and powerful work, and say that it's been an honor, and I learned a lot getting to talk to you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to read and review and engage in this conversation with me. I'm also really inspired by your questions and insight, and you're pushing me to do new things too. I cannot wait to read my book front to back. Thank you for that nudge. And yeah, I'm excited to see who else might want to try that with me. And just, yeah, I'm also inspired by you and the work you're doing in the world. And just thank you, Wende. And thank you, Firoze, also for creating this.
Firoze, yeah, for bringing us together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been wonderful having you on the show. And I look forward to the opportunity of reading more of your work. One day, perhaps, to actually see it too. And to meet you in person, which would be wonderful. Wende, thank you very much for these inspiring questions. I think, yes, I want to read it again and again. So that has helped a lot. Nikesha, thank you for joining us today, and wish you all the very best in the future. This is Firoze Manji signing off for today. And thank you to Wende, thank you to Nikesha, and we will be back online again in due course. Goodbye from Firoze, goodbye from Wende, goodbye from Nikesha.